This evening, we continue in our study of Revelation. We are in chapter 13, beginning there in verse 1. And again, as I just mentioned, many people in our world, when they hear of this 666, want to apply it to everything that they deem is wrong or might be wrong within the world or within their concept or worldview. The thing about it is that we've already talked about being those who are sealed with the seal of righteousness. The 666 is the seal of unrighteousness. And we'll get into that as we go through chapter 13 here in this passage, or in these passages, if you will. When we think about Revelation chapter 13, it is a continuation of encouragement for the 7 churches of Asia. The persecution of the early churches have been reported in this context symbolically, apocalyptically, if you will, in this writing of Revelation. And we have seen several awful, beastful images that are scary in a way. The thing is that persecution is frightful. Being persecuted by a nation or a country or being persecuted in any way can be a terrible thing, and it's something that we really don't understand because we're not there. Even though we can see persecution in our world, and we see videos and movies and all this kind of stuff, these pictures of persecution. Within this context, we are still talking about the pure lady and her child. And in essence, we're talking about the faithful. We're talking about the persecution that was brought upon our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, as he came into the world. Although the power of the tempter has been curtailed by the ascendance of Jesus Christ to the throne of David, he continues to entice Christians into sin and apostasy. And that's a key factor. And we'll find this in our study of Revelation, is that one of the limitations that Satan has is he cannot use a nation against the faithful. But he can use other individuals against the faithful. Things changed from the time that we're noting here with Rome until it was the individuals persecuting individuals. And those individuals that are persecuting the faithful today, they may be even organized into a group that would do so. In spite of this all-out war on the saints, though, God's going to protect them, and that's the key factor here in Revelation. It enables the truly faithful to persevere, to make it. We are overcomers, and that's one of the key words here in the Revelation. In chapter 12, it becomes chapter 13, a new beast appears from the sea to trouble the church, to trouble the faithful. The relentlessness of Roman persecution was formidable and discouraging, but the church prevailed. And we see that in history. And it is a truism for the future. The church will always prevail, but the individuals, the Christians, the faithful, will have to endure this struggle that comes our way. Unlike many of their neighbors, the ancient Hebrews, they were not a seafaring people. This is reflected in that the parables of Christ focus on less upon voyages and storms and more upon farming and husbandry. When it talks about this dragon, this beast, it's come up out of the sea, we do know that others in that ancient time were seafarers. And a lot of times the problems that come the way of societies came from the sea. And I would suggest if you go back and you do a little study on the sea people and what they did in the Mediterranean during their time was horrendous. And that wasn't specifically against Christians, that was against everybody. It's just a historical concept that would be interesting. Now, if you, excuse me, if you figure out who the sea people, the sea people were in history, let somebody know because nobody else does. They just know that it happened. They just don't know who they were. That this beast arises from the sea adds to its mystery and horror, and the clear reconciling of symbols from the book of Daniel clarifies his purpose and power in Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 14. If you go to Daniel, it brings to light that these things are going to happen. It's prophecy, and it's noted that these things did happen. The sea beast in Revelation bears a resemblance to Daniel's fourth beast. And I encourage you to go back to Daniel chapter 2, look at verses 31 through 45, where it notes that those there are the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, and Rome. And this is depicting the idea of Rome, the Roman Empire. It's in the chronology in Daniel, and it is what they are dealing with here in the Revelation. The empire is mortally wounded and then shockingly healed, perhaps as a reference to the death of the persecutor of Peter and Paul, that being Nero. And also we will note here in just a little bit that brings to light the idea of Domitian. Well, he will fall into this same thing. The four things are given to the beast, the empire, and the sovereign Caesars. A mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. The Caesars demanded to be called God themselves and tormented anyone who would follow the true Jehovah, the true God. They wanted to be worshipped as God. Their authority was to continue 42 months, symbolically denoting that period of persecution, which was not a totality. We've talked about that numerology already in several of our lessons. Authority to make war with the saints and to overcome them was the persecution that they're dealing with and will deal with worse in the future when Domitian comes into power. Authority over every tribe, tongue, and nation. Rome was in dominance of the majority of the Mediterranean world, even went into Europe, went into Asia, went into India. It was a big thing. They were ruling that whole area, worldwide political dominance, and that was one of their falling points. Like the crucifixion of Christ, overcoming the saints is only a temporary victory, for resurrection turns death into life. If persecution comes their way, and they do die, going back to Revelation chapter 2, verse 10, even if they die, they will receive the crown of life. They have to endure it. That's not good. But the blessing is that there is a greater after while. Again, you go back, look at Daniel chapter 7, verses 21 through 27. When we think about this beast, it's more like a poodle with the bark of a German shepherd. The other night, I saw this little meme, I guess you would call it. And what it was a Chihuahua, and somebody had brought a Mastiff in. Y'all ever seen a Chihuahua and a big dog? That Chihuahua's going to take that big one out. He may get eaten the deal, but he's going to take That's kind of what this is dealing with. Like a poodle with the bark of a German shepherd, this land beast was the docile and harmless appearance of a lamb, with the growl of a terrible dragon, the voice of wickedness. Now, the land beast acts under the authority of the sea beast. It is the enforcer of emperor worship in Asia Minor. And again, we go back to Rome, being Rome. There were those who were in Israel and the Middle East that was in power. They were in Asia Minor. And they were powerful, and they were told, or they told people, you worship the emperor or else. Now, as God sealed the people with his name upon their foreheads, talking about the seal of righteousness over in Revelation chapter 7, verses 3 through 8. Now the land beast demands visible signs of allegiance to the sea beast, the empire, that being Rome. And that's the seal of the unrighteous. And that's where we get the 666. Now, a little ahead here on that note. No one can ever force you to receive the seal of unrighteousness. No one can make you do that. Nobody's going to come along and stamp anything on you, period. But for the ideas that are out there in the world, you will not be forced into that seal. You can reject it, and you can receive the seal of righteousness by becoming a child of God, being those who are faithful. And there's a differentiation there. Now, I would suggest, as we look over in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, where it talks about there will be many that will go down the wide road of unrighteousness, and only the few will go down the road of righteousness. Those going down the road of righteousness have chosen to be sealed with the seal of righteousness. Those that are going down the road of unrighteousness have chosen the seal of 666, the unrighteousness. And the 666 is one less than God, which is imperfect. And it is added to 100, plus that's 10. We'll get to that, but it's 10 plus 10 times 10 anyway. We get to 666. And that just means they're absolutely not perfect. They're imperfect. And that's what it means. This idea that somebody's going to come along and stamp something on your head, and it's going to look like a, what do they call those square things, they got on everything these days? I can't remember what the name of it is. If you go buy something, you can scan it and all that stuff. Nah, that's not what it's talking about here in this passage, because they didn't have that in the first century, number one. The key factor is that as Christians, we are sealed with righteousness. That's encouraging, even if we face persecution. As time and chapter designates interruption to this stirring and frightful scene, we find the authority of the sea beast and the empire, which executed by the land beast, his priests and enforcers, as the idolatry of a defied Caesar marches forward among the churches. And this gets us back to the idea of emperor worship. And it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. You worship the emperor or you die. And other groups of individuals in our world have propagated this same kind of, I guess I'll use the word methodology of conversion. You do it my way or you're dead. And it's been throughout the ages. Two of these groups, as I noted recently, had their beginnings back in the 600s. So let's look at Revelation 13. Beginning here in verse 1, it says, "And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his head were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet was like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority." That kind of sounds a little bit fearful. This thing coming up out of the sea to literally attack and take in. That's what people are taught today. In essence, it boils down to the dragon, Satan. This beast is Rome, coming up out of the sea, having all of these horns, all of these diadems, all of these heads, all of these blasphemous names. We could pretty well look at history and get these names because it was the Caesars. It was the Caesars of Rome that had these names. Well, and then it denotes it being a fearful looking creature, noting all these saw like a leopard, the feet of those of a bear, and all of those things that you wouldn't want to run into. But now look at the last part of verse 2. "And the dragon gave him his power." Rome was working for Satan. Restricted, but working for Satan. "And his throne and great authority." Destroy Christianity. That was what it was all about. And we still have those that are individuals within organized groups that are continually trying to destroy Christianity. Now, let me throw out a thought here, and we'll get to this a little bit more as we study this. When it talks about the beast that comes out of the sea, it's not talking specifically about some beast coming up out of the water. But in Revelation, when it talks about the sea, it talks about the sea of humanity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue through our study. So John sees this beast rise up out of the sea, is just what I mentioned a while ago. We have seen the sea used before to depict separation, and we have seen the sea used to depict the restless, unsettled nations of the world. And that's what he's talking about here. All these nations that are coming up, that are Rome. And if you go back and you study about Rome, the military part of the Romans was not always just those from Italy, what we know of as Italy today. But they were from all of these countries. They had mercenaries, they had individuals that they would inscript to be part of their military. So this beast comes out of the sea of humanity. That later symbol seems to be the one that God is using here. We see this similarly to Isaiah chapter 17, going down to verse 12, where it says, "Alas, the uproar of many people who roar like the roaring of the seas, and the rumbling of nations who rush on like the rumbling of mighty waters. The nations rumble on like the rumbling of many waters, but he will rebuke them, and they will flee far away and be chased like chaff into the mountains before the wind, or like whirling dust before the gale." Again, talking about the sea of humanity. And this symbol fits very perfectly with Rome. The beast represents Rome. Rome arose from the restless, unsettled nations of the world. It's not something that's coming. It's something that has been and still is represented in our world today. The beast with the 7 heads, the 10 horns, and the 10 diadems. This is the same description that we were given of the dragon back in chapter 12 and verse 3. It says, "Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems." So we've already seen this with the dragon. A diadem is defined as a blue band marked with white, which Persian kings used to bind on the turban or tiara. The kingly ornament for the head, the crown. And some of the versions use the word crown instead of diadems, which is just fine, denoting a station or status, if you will. This beast is both a weapon of Satan and a manifestation of Satan. Those who stand against God, against Christianity, is manifest by Satan. I mean, Satan is the one that's out there trying to destroy. Satan is the driving power behind the attack by Rome on the church, and even today, Satan is out there like a roaring lion seeking those in whom he can devour, as Peter notes. That the beast is now wearing Satan's royal headdress tells us that the dragon was given power and authority, and he was acting on the beast, Rome, is acting on the behalf of Satan. In verse 3 of Revelation 13, it says, "I saw one of his heads. If it had been slain, and a fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed, and followed after the beast." Now, this is where we're going to see the situation when this was written, the situation for the people when this was written. Because they're in a lull. I'm going to use the word lull. It's an in-between serious, terrible persecutions. And it's between the persecution that was mostly at Rome and then the persecution that was outside of Rome. Well, when we talk about this head, this is a key to being mortally wounded. The ASV puts it like this. It says, "And I saw one of its heads as though it had been smitten unto death." The mortal wound denotes the idea of it being dead. Well, the phrase also notes simply means the head that was portrayed had been slain. It does not necessarily mean that the head only appeared to have been slain within this context, but it had been slain. When we think about the emperors, we think about the situation. There was one thing about being an emperor in Rome or a Caesar. You might not last very long because there was always somebody wanting to get rid of you. Now, which emperor is depicted by this head that is slain? In Revelation chapter 17, verse 8, we read, "The beast that you saw was, it is not. It is to ascend from the bottomless pit and to go to perdition. The dwellers on the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to behold the beast, because it was and is not and is to come." Well, when we look at verse 3, it notes was and is not to come. Here in verse 3, we see a head of the beast that dies, but is then healed. It comes back. And from verse 12, we know that it was the beast itself that died and was healed. Now remember, this is apocalyptic language. It's not going to be written down that this emperor died and this emperor rose. But that's what it's dictating here. Because we would ask the question, what sort of beast could be said to have died and then come back to life? Well, whatever sort of beast it was, the statement in 17:8 that it is not suggests that when the vision was received, the beast had already died, but had not yet come back to life. We're in that interim. We're in an interim time. Yes, the 7 churches of Asia are being persecuted. Emperor worship is being propagated, but it's going to get worse. Remember, we've always talked about in this, it's going to get worse with Domitian. But he's going back and he's reminding them of what had previously happened. And that is with Nero and the persecution under Nero. The answer is that the first beast represents Rome, no surprise there, but it does so from a particular perspective. The beast depicts Rome as a civil persecutor of God's people, which reached its heights in the first century under Nero and Domitian. Nero's dead at the writing of the Revelation. Domitian hasn't come into power yet. So they're in this interim, this lull right here, right now, and that's why they're being encouraged. It notes here first the depiction of the beast tells us that it is a persecutor. And second, the focus on its head is the focus on the emperors of Rome. And I noted that a while ago. All these 7 heads denotes different emperors of Rome. Putting those together, we see a beast that depicts the Roman persecution from the standpoint of the Roman emperors, that is, from the standpoint of the Roman civil authorities. The government ordained by God had gone bad and turned against God's people. And at this time, Christianity was looked at as just one of those sects that come out of Asia, and it was nothing that they were interested in because it was not emperor worship, it was not Judaism, and it was not one of the pagan religions. We will see, or we will meet a second beast in this chapter, and we will see that it is also a persecutor. In fact, the second beast will kill those who refuse to worship the first beast. And again, that gets us deeper into the idea of emperor worship. There is no doubt that the descriptions of these beasts overlap and that both show Roman as persecutor. But as we will see when we get to the second beast, they do so from a different angle. They come in from a different direction. The death of the first beast meant at an end, or at least a dramatic drop in persecution by civil authorities, and that's kind of this interim I'm talking about. And the resurrection of the beast would be a sudden reappearance of that persecution. And again, that brings to light the persecution that they're about to face under Domitian. Now, this first picture is I think getting in my brain here in a minute. Nero. This is a bust of Nero, and this is a bust of Domitian. Tertullian said that, this is a historian, Tertullian said that Nero was the first emperor who dyed his sword in Christian blood. And Eusebius, another historical writer, wrote that Domitian finally showed himself the successor of Nero's campaign of hostility to God. He was the second to promote persecution against us. And that's what we're talking about here in chapter 13. Think about what happened in the past and what's coming. Now, this image of the beast coming back to life was an interesting historical parallel. After the death of Nero in AD 68, there were many rumors that he had not died and that he would come back to life. Well, they kind of took that from the teachings of Christianity, that resurrection idea. This belief was called the Nero Redivivus legend. That's the best I can pronounce it. The early written version of this legend is found in Civilis oracles that claim that Nero did not die but fled to Partha, where he would build a large army and return to Rome to destroy it. And if you go back, do a little study on old Nero. We say sometimes that guy was nuts. Well, he was past nuts. He was insane. And the things that he did was just ungodly. Both of them, really, but Nero's persecution was in Rome. Domitian's persecution was outside of Rome. And there's a whole lot there. At least 3 Nero impostors emerged to lead rebellions, those that noted, well, I'm the resurrected Nero, but they really wasn't. The first who sang and played the flute and whose face was similar to that of the dead emperor appeared at AD 69 during the reign of Vitellius. Sometime during the reign of Titus, there was another impostor who appeared in Asia and also sang with the accompaniment of the lyre and looked like Nero. 20 years after Nero's death during the reign of Domitian, there was a third pretender. Domitian himself was regarded by some as the Nero Redavitus, that resurrected Nero in essence. Chaos and civil war was followed the death of Nero. Nero was alone in death, and the Julio-Claudian dynasty fell with him. That was his family. There was a lot of civil war, people wanting to bid for power. When Nero came to power in 54, there were 6 other males who traced their heritage back to Augustus and Claudius. These men died during Nero's reign. Some of them purposely died during Nero's reign. Nero's death left a political vacuum that many rushed to occupy. And of course, that was one of those realities. The leader of the Spanish rebellion, Gabla, was the accepted replacement. It notes some things here, others that come in to want to replace him. Ortho came in, Vitellius. Ortho was from the German legions. That's a whole interesting historical event, was the Germans and the Romans. Go back, Vespasian was involved in all of this. Vitellius was involved in all of this. So all these guys, they wanted that place of power. So what are we saying? The beast is Rome as a civil persecuting power. The beast came to the forefront under Nero, but when Nero died, so did the beast, as the persecution temporarily subsided. It was not gone, but subsided. When Revelation was written, the beast was still dead, which also fits the history. This book was written during a lull in the persecution that occurred during the reign of Vespasian. Later, though the beast would come back to life under Domitian, who was, in a sense, Nero Redivus, Tertullian tells him a limb of the 2 bloody Neros. Domitian represents a new beginning of persecution against God's people, and he was the 8th king or emperor. And again, it was pretty bad. Let's look at verse 4 quickly, because it all folds together here. They worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him?" In this verse, we see 2 of the most horrible images that are in the entire book: dragon worship and beast worship. If we worship the dragon, then like the dragon we will become. Remember the dragon? Satan. If we worship the beast, then like the beast will we become. Those who are persecuting the Christians, Rome, at this time, and have no about it. Dragon worship and beast worship are well alive today. Those who are worship Satan, which I would suggest is a great number of our world today, people that worship Satan. And some people don't even know they're worshiping Satan, but they are. When we think about an organized group of individuals that are coming against Christianity today, there's so many, you can't even count them. But they're out there. And they are that driving power, like Rome was, that Satan utilizes. Why did they worship the beast? Because it had died and come back to life. It was unstoppable. And what seemed here is a ghastly parody of Jesus, who truly died and came back to life. And like Pharaoh's magician, Rome is saying, look at what we can do. Look at that too. In fact, this theme that runs throughout the book, though it does so rightly beneath the surface. So the beast denotes that which would persecute the faithful. Just imagine the scene from the church's point of view. It must have almost seemed to them that even God was powerless to stop this beast. If you're facing persecution, it would be a struggle, and it's going to get worse. What hope did the church have? Well, the church is be faithful. Even though they may think he's unstoppable, would it ever be killed once and for all? Yeah. When Jesus comes back, it'll be finished. Would it always come back from the dead? Can it ever be stopped? That was the situation in which they were trying to think. The situation was bleak, even though they were in that interim. The very next verse will help us have a little hope. And that's what this whole deal is about having hope. So we'll begin there in verse 5, Lord willing, next Wednesday evening, and continue in chapter 13.